An undercover black CEO decided one day to step into one of his own stores without announcing who he was. He wanted to see things as they truly were, unfiltered and raw, without the polished smiles or rehearsed greetings that came when management knew the boss was visiting. It was about more than profit margins or customer service reports. He wanted to witness the human side of his company, the side that couldn't be captured on paper. Walking through the aisles, he blended in like any regular person. No tailored suit, no entourage, no hint of his identity. Just a man, observing quietly, taking in the small details that most executives would never notice. Every interaction he saw mattered, because it was a reflection of whether his business lived up to the values he built it on. But his mission wasn't about numbers. It was about truth. He wanted to uncover the hidden culture beneath the surface, the way employees treated one another, and how the people at the very bottom of the chain were valued or neglected. This was his way of measuring success, not through charts and graphs, but through people's faces, their attitudes, their voices when no one important was listening. To him, the real test of leadership was whether a company's spirit reached every corner, from the executives in the boardroom to the janitor sweeping the floor. So as he entered the store that day, he carried with him both curiosity and a quiet determination. He knew he might find small problems, maybe even a few careless attitudes, but he was not prepared for what he would actually see. What started as a simple visit to check in on his business would soon turn into a moment of reckoning, one that revealed far more about his company than he ever expected. He moved carefully through the store, paying attention to everything around him, but also making sure not to draw attention to himself. He looked like any other customer, dressed in simple clothes, blending into the crowd. What made this visit different was his intent. He wasn't there to shop, he was there to see. For months, he had been visiting different branches of his company under the radar, quietly walking the floors, listening in on conversations, watching how employees carried themselves when they thought no one important was watching. It was the kind of truth he could never get sitting behind a desk or reading reports prepared by managers who polished every detail. This was about reality, the raw and unfiltered atmosphere of his own business. As he walked further inside, he noticed how some workers smiled mechanically at customers, while others avoided eye contact altogether. He saw how the manager spoke, how decisions were made in small moments, and whether respect was a rule or just a slogan printed on a poster. Each interaction mattered to him, because it revealed more about the culture of the company than any chart or number could. What he was really looking for wasn't perfection, it was authenticity. He wanted to know if kindness lived in the hallways, if teamwork thrived in the corners where no cameras reached, if the people at the very bottom felt they had worth. In that quiet observation, he carried a weight most employees didn't know was there. He wasn't just an ordinary man strolling through the store. He was the one who had built it all from the ground up. Yet here he was, hiding his identity, seeking truth not from reports, but from the human moments unfolding before him. As he made his way toward the back of the store, something unexpected caught his attention. In a quiet corner, away from the noise of customers and the steady hum of checkout counters, he noticed a man sitting alone. It was the janitor, still in his work uniform, shoulders slumped forward, his face hidden in his hands. At first, the CEO thought the man was just resting after a long shift. But then he saw it. Tears. The janitor was crying silently, trying not to be noticed. For a moment, the CEO stood frozen. In all his undercover visits, he had seen tired employees, stressed managers, even workers frustrated with the grind of retail life. but he had never seen someone so broken that they couldn't hold back their emotions at work. Curiosity mixed with concern, and he felt an ache in his chest. This was a man most people would walk past without a second thought. Someone whose name might not even be remembered by the staff, who relied on his work every single day. Yet here he was, visibly hurting, alone, and invisible to the rest of the store. The CEO didn't want to scare him or come across as intrusive, so he approached slowly, gently, as though stepping into a fragile moment. In that instant, he didn't think like a businessman calculating profits. He fought like a human being confronted with someone else's pain. The scene struck him deeply. This wasn't just about one worker having a bad day. Something bigger was happening here, something that had pushed a grown man to tears while still on the clock. Whatever the reason was, he knew it carried weight. And for the CEO, this was the moment when his quiet undercover mission shifted from observation to action. The CEO hesitated for a brief moment, debating whether to step in or simply walk away. He knew this was a delicate situation. Sometimes when people are hurting, the last thing they want is an audience. But something inside him refused to let this moment pass. He reminded himself why he was there, not just to check numbers, not just to see customer service in action, but to truly understand the human side of his company. So, gathering himself, he walked over quietly and lowered his voice so as not to startle the man. With a calm, almost fatherly tone, he asked a simple question. "Are you okay?" The janitor looked up, startled, his eyes red and wet. For a second, he seemed almost embarrassed, as though he had been caught in a moment of weakness. He quickly wiped his face with the back of his sleeve and muttered something about being fine. But the CEO could see right through it. Years of leading people had taught him that sometimes the most important thing you can do is ask again. Not with words, but with presence. So he stayed there, his expression soft and patient, silently communicating that he wasn't in a rush, that he genuinely cared. The janitor studied him, perhaps confused as to why a stranger would care enough to stop. That pause stretched into something heavier, and finally, with a shaky breath, the janitor admitted that he wasn't okay at all. The words came slowly, broken by emotion, but they were honest. He confessed that the job itself wasn't what made him cry. It wasn't the long hours or even the hard work. It was something else, something deeper, and at that moment, the CEO knew he was about to hear a truth that would shake him to his core. The janitor's voice trembled as he began to explain himself. At first, the words came out in fragments, as though each sentence was a heavy burden to lift. He admitted that the work itself wasn't the problem. He had cleaned floors his whole life, and he took pride in leaving a space spotless. What broke him down wasn't the mop in his hands or the trash he carried out at night. It was the way people treated him while he did it. He explained how employees walked past him as though he didn't exist, how some of the younger staff mocked him quietly when they thought he couldn't hear, and how supervisors barked orders at him without so much as a please or thank you. As the CEO listened, his chest tightened. The janitor went on, describing how he often stayed late to make sure everything was perfect, only to be scolded for the smallest oversight. He said he felt invisible most days, like he was just part of the furniture, noticed only when something went wrong. His tears weren't from physical exhaustion, but from emotional wear. "It's like I'm not even a person to them," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I do everything I can, and still, I'm treated like I'm nothing." The CEO didn't interrupt. He let the man's words flow, heavy and raw, each one cutting deeper into his conscience. He realized that this wasn't just one man's story. It was a reflection of how easily dignity can be stripped away when people forget to see the humanity in others. For the janitor, kindness had become a rare gift, and cruelty had become routine. And in that moment, the CEO knew the truth wasn't about the job. It was about respect, or rather, the painful absence of it. The janitor's words carried a weight that pressed down on the CEO like a stone. He had always believed his company was built on values of respect and dignity. But what he was hearing painted a very different picture. The man explained that it wasn't just the occasional rude comment or moment of impatience. It was a culture, one that made him feel small every single day. Coworkers laughed behind his back when they thought he couldn't hear, mocking his age, his uniform, even the way he moved as he worked. Management, instead of defending him, ignored it, sometimes even joining in with dismissive remarks. He said that no matter how hard he worked, it felt like he would always be invisible. Trapped at the bottom of a ladder no one believed he deserved to climb. The CEO felt each confession like a blow. He had walked into the store expecting to see ordinary challenges, low morale, maybe a lazy employee or two. But instead, he was seeing the cracks in the foundation of his own vision. This wasn't just disrespect for one man. It was a failure of leadership, a failure of culture, and a betrayal of the values he believed defined his company. What shocked him most was how easily it had been hidden. On paper, the numbers looked good. Reports showed the store was profitable. Customer surveys spoke of efficiency. Yet beneath all of that, one of his employees was breaking down, not because of the workload, but because of how he was being treated as a human being. As the janitor spoke, the CEO realized the truth was worse than anything he had prepared for. Somewhere along the way, people had stopped seeing the janitor as a person, and that was a reality he could not ignore. The CEO stood there in silence, his mind racing as the janitor's words echoed inside him. Shock wasn't a strong enough word for what he felt. It was something deeper, a mix of anger, guilt, and disappointment. This was his company, his creation, his dream built from the ground up. And yet, here was proof that within these walls, the very values he preached were being trampled on. He had always believed that respect should flow from the top down and ripple across every level of the business. But what he saw now was the opposite. The people closest to the ground, the ones doing the toughest, most thankless work, were being dismissed, mocked, and stripped of their dignity. He felt anger toward the managers who had allowed such behavior to take root, who looked the other way instead of protecting the vulnerable. He felt disappointment toward the staff who thought belittling someone was acceptable. But more than anything, he felt a heavy guilt in his own chest. He realized that while he had been focused on expansion, profits, and growth, cracks in the culture had gone unnoticed. Somewhere along the journey, the heart of his mission had been forgotten. The janitor's tears weren't just about his own pain. They were a mirror reflecting the CEO's blind spots. And in that mirror, he saw not only a man who had been mistreated, but a company that had failed him. He knew he could never look at the store the same way again. For the first time, his undercover visits stopped feeling like routine checks. They became personal. This wasn't about a business problem. It was about a human one. And that truth hit him harder than any financial loss ever could. The CEO took a deep breath, realizing the moment had come when silence was no longer enough. He had listened, he had absorbed the pain in the janitor's words, and now he felt an overwhelming need to step out from behind the mask he had worn. With a steady but gentle voice, he leaned closer and said, "There's something you need to know about me." The janitor looked up, his eyes still wet, his expression weary and uncertain. He probably expected just another stranger's words of comfort, but what came next left him stunned. The CEO continued softly, "I'm not just a passerby. I'm the CEO. I own this company." For a second, the room felt still, like even the air had frozen. The janitor blinked, confusion flickering across his face as he tried to process what he had just heard. He glanced at the man's simple clothes, his modest presence, and struggled to reconcile that with the weight of the title. The CEO wasn't wearing the armor of a suit or the aura of wealth. He was just standing there, eye to eye, heart to heart, and that made his words even more powerful. The janitor's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His shock was written in his silence. The CEO pressed on, assuring him that every word he had shared mattered, that his pain had not fallen on deaf ears. This wasn't just a casual encounter, it was a turning point. By revealing his true identity, the CEO shifted the entire weight of the conversation. He wasn't just another person showing sympathy. He was the man with the power to change everything. And in that moment, the janitor realized he had finally been heard by the one person who could make his voice impossible to ignore. The CEO straightened his back, no longer just a quiet observer, but a leader stepping fully into his role. His voice, though calm, carried an authority that filled the room. He told the janitor that things were going to change immediately. This wasn't a promise for the future or a vague reassurance. It was a declaration. He had seen enough, heard enough, and now he was ready to act. The janitor's tears had revealed more about the company than any polished report or quarterly meeting ever could, and the CEO was determined not to let that truth slip back into silence. He asked the janitor to trust him, assuring him that his words would not be buried under excuses or bureaucracy. Then, without wasting time, he called for the store's managers. When they arrived, they expected a routine check or a surprise inspection, but instead, they were met with the piercing eyes of the very man who signed their paychecks. Their confident smiles faded when they realized the stranger standing in front of them was not a customer at all. It was the CEO himself, and he wasn't pleased. He demanded answers, forcing them to confront the way they had allowed disrespect to become normal. Every dismissive laugh, every unkind word, every moment of neglect had built a culture that betrayed the values he had worked to instill. The managers stumbled over excuses, but the CEO cut through them with firm words. He made it clear that accountability wasn't optional, and that the treatment of employees, especially the most overlooked, would define whether they had a future in his company. In that moment, the janitor wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't just a man in a uniform with a mop. He was the reason the CEO was shaking the walls of his own business. Change had begun, and it started with him. The CEO looked back at the janitor, his voice softening after the storm of accountability he had just unleashed. He told him that no title, no role, and no paycheck determined a person's worth. What mattered was character, dedication, and the humanity that each person brought into the workplace. He reminded everyone listening that the janitor's work was not beneath anyone. It was the foundation that allowed the store to shine, the quiet labor that kept everything running. Without him, nothing else would function. And yet, despite all that, he had been treated as if he were invisible. That, the CEO declared, would never happen again. He spoke not just to the managers, but to every employee who had gathered to witness the moment. Respect, he said, was not negotiable. It wasn't a slogan for a poster or a line in a handbook. It was the heartbeat of a healthy company. If people could not offer kindness to one another, then they had no place within his organization. He promised the janitor better treatment, not as charity, but as a right he had always deserved. And then, turning to the staff, he reminded them that leadership wasn't about power. It was about lifting others up, especially those who were easiest to overlook. The janitor's tears had started as a sign of pain, but now they carried something else: relief. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen, heard, and valued. The CEO left that store, knowing that profit margins and customer reviews would never define his legacy. What would define it was how his company treated people, from the boardroom to the break room. Because at the end of the day, the greatest measure of success is simple. No one, no matter their role, should ever be made to feel small.